Now, we're now into the really exciting kind of final home straight. We're going to do some amazing things this afternoon, or you're going to do some amazing things this afternoon. But to kick us off for the afternoon, I'm extremely delighted to introduce to you Don Tapscott. Don is one of the world's leading authorities on business strategy. He's chairman of nGenera Insight. Perhaps more importantly, he is a brilliant and very famous author. He's written 13 widely read books, including Wikinomics, and for this meeting, the most relevant of his books was written in 1997, all about growing up digital. So he was probably one of the first people in the world to actually identify your generation that would be growing up digital. So it gives me enormous pleasure, and if we can give a massive One Young World welcome to Don. Thank you very much. Thanks, Don.
Cheers, Don. Thank you.
Well, I'm sure after sitting here for a couple of days, it's quite apparent to everyone in this room that the world that my generation is leaving you is a very troubled one. And your challenge, it's really an historic challenge, is to rebuild the world and all of its institutions. And I've got 15 minutes to convince you of one idea. And that idea is that unlike any generation previous to you, you are uniquely equipped to bring about very profound change. For three reasons. One, your demographic size as a generation relative to the rest of the world. Two, the fact that at your fingertips you have the most powerful tool ever for finding out what's going on, organizing collective responses, and bringing about social change. It's called the World Wide Web, the internet. And three, because you grew up digital and using this stuff, your brain is actually different than my brain. And you have a more appropriate brain to bring about change. Let me explain. First, a word on why I have some credibility to make such a claim. My first book was in 1981, and it was about the internet. My mother bought most of them, unfortunately. But I started studying kids as a generation about 15 years ago when I noticed how my own children were effortlessly able to use all this sophisticated technology. And at first I thought, my children are prodigies. They're like geniuses. And then I noticed that all their friends were like them, so that was a bad theory. So I started working with 300 kids, and in 1997 I wrote Growing Up Digital. I've just published the sequel now called Grown Up Digital. It's about your generation. Now, let's look at you as a generation demographically. This is a little program. You can use it. It's called World Mapper, an open source program. And you can plug a data set into every country. So the data set that I plugged into every country was called surface area of a country. So it distorts the map to show the surface area of every country. Now, this is a different data set. I plugged in the world map according to population age 15 to 30. Pretty much most of you in this room. There is a demographic tidal wave of young people. Now, it's happening everywhere in the world except for Western Europe and Japan. And Western Europe and Japan have a unique problem. They need to listen to you even more because there are fewer of you in those parts of the world. But all around the world, you have huge power. In the United States, I'm part of the baby boom. And my children are part of what's called the baby boom echo. And the echo is louder than the original boom in the United States. There's 78 million of me, baby boomers, and there are 80 million of you. Now, what is the defining characteristic of this generation? Well, to me, the really big thing that's changed is you're the first generation to be bathed in bits. Computers, the internet, interactive technologies are part of the experience of youth. And all around the world, this is happening today, as the time online for you is not taken away from hanging out with your friends, learning the piano, talking to your parents, doing your homework, or kicking a football. Time online is taken away from television. The baby boomers watch 24 hours a week of TV, and your generation watches a lot less TV, and you watch it differently. You're a high school student, you come home and you turn on your computer and you're in 3 windows and you're searching for stuff and reading and thinking and organizing information. The television is kind of in the background like music. And this actually changes the way your brain works, because if you spend 24 hours a week watching TV, you get a certain kind of brain, as my generation did when you're growing up. If you spend an equivalent amount of time being the active handler of information, the user as opposed to the passive recipient, that affects your brain as well. Furthermore, this is the first time in human history when children are an authority about something really important. Think about that one. When I was 11, I was an authority on model trains. Today, the 11-year-old at the breakfast table in many parts of the world is an authority on this digital revolution that's changing business, commerce, government, learning, entertainment, publishing, every institution in society. This is a huge change. Back in the 60s, when I grew up, we had this thing called the generation gap. Big differences between kids and parents over values and lifestyle. Doesn't exist today. Kids and parents get along pretty well. Look at your iPod and your parents' iPod. There's probably overlap. My parents didn't even like the Beatles, let alone, you know, the Rolling Stones or the Doors or something like that. What we have today is what I called a generation lap. Not gap, a generation lap, where kids are lapping their parents on the info track. Think about when you were a high school student. Who does the systems administration in your home? This has never happened before, that the kids in the schools know more than the teachers about the biggest innovation in learning ever. The kids coming into the workforce at their fingertips have more powerful tools than exist in our most sophisticated corporations. This is a huge change, and it gives you great, awesome power. Now, some adults understand this intersection of demographics and technology. One is a guy named Barack Obama, who used the internet to enable young people to self-organize, and that brought him to power. This is not just my point of view, it's his point of view. I don't know if you can, see this here. So I started figuring this out about 3 years ago. Someone sent me an email saying, do you know this senator from Illinois named Obama thinks that your book, a book I'd written called Wikinomics, is the key to winning the presidency and changing America. Go to mybarackobama.com. So I went there, and sure enough, there's my book. And it says, we believe in openness and collaboration and partnership and transparency in the book Wikinomics. And I'm asking you to believe not in my ability to bring about real change in Washington. I'm asking you to believe in yours. And I looked at this thing, and I have to tell you, my first reaction was, I am the man. But then I got underneath it a little bit, and I saw that there was not just a Wikinomics community, there was a single moms who support daycare for Obama community, and there was a young firefighters for Obama community. He created a platform whereby 35,000 communities powered by young people swept him into office. This is a force for profound change. And in places where you need really deep change, this is a revolutionary force. Iran has the largest proportion of teenagers and 20-somethings to the rest of the population of any country in the world. You combine that with access to the internet and secular information, this is not just about who gets elected in Iran, it's a challenge to the non-secular nature of the society and to the theocracy. This is unstoppable. They can try and shut down Twitter, they can try and kill Facebook and pull the plug on mobile phones and so on. It is not stoppable. So what we have here then is really a turning point in human history, and you're the ones who are beginning to lead this. And for that, I'm very thankful. What is the challenge that you have? I don't think we're just in a recession. This is a punctuation point, where we're moving from an old kind of economy and society to a fundamentally different one. Let me give you just some examples of institutions that you need to rebuild. The financial system collapsed. And I'll tell you, it needs a lot more than some new regulation. It needs a whole new modus operandi that's built on transparency. Now, for each of these institutions, there's an old one that's failing, that's stalled and frozen, and then there's a new one that's beginning to emerge based on networks, based on transparency and openness, and where, for young people, this is all just like the air. It's the way things should be. So there are all kinds of powerful new things happening in financial services with peer-to-peer lending, all kinds of activity in the developing world, new sharing of risk management information, and so on. Promise contrasted against failure. Another failing institution, the energy platform. This is not about buying a Prius or something. We need to reindustrialize the planet. And we've got about 40 years, maybe 50 years to do that. I was at Davos at the World Economic Forum talking to Bill Clinton. He says that if we reduce carbon emissions by 80% in the year 2050, not by 6%, by 80% in the year 2050, it'll take 1,000 years for the planet to cool down. And in the meantime, some bad things are going to happen. Like in the next couple of decades, it's likely 1.5 billion people will lose half of their water supply. You think Haiti's a humanitarian disaster. Wait till you see 1.5 billion people lose half of their water supply. We need to rethink energy. We need to rethink our transportation system based on this internal combustion engine. It's caused huge problems. How do we solve problems globally? Our systems for global cooperation and governance are broken. They're based after the Second World War. We created these things like the United Nations, and we had Bretton Woods and the creation of eventually the IMF and the World Trade Organization and so on. These are failing. You look at the United Nations, that meeting that happened a few months ago, all these leaders from countries get up and they give their point of view. It's not just that nothing happens, nobody's even listening. The nation state is the wrong size for a global economy. We need to build multi-stakeholder networks like this one in this room that cut across nation states and that bring together individuals, governments, civil society organizations, and private companies. So while nation states are failing in Copenhagen, I estimate there are 10 to 15 million people that are organizing on the internet to solve climate change. This is the first time in history where the whole world is becoming mobilized and we're all on the same side. We've been mobilized as a world before, but it was around world wars where we were on different sides. We're now on the same side. We've got the education system that's failing. You know, in the United States, I'm convinced the smartest students don't go to lectures. The big thing is to get an A without having ever gone to the lecture. The cream of the crop of an entire generation is boycotting the formal model of pedagogy. The old broadcast model. I'm a teacher. I have knowledge. You're a student. You're an empty vessel. You don't have knowledge. Get ready. Here it comes. That may have been okay for me. My generation, I grew up being broadcast to. I watched TV. My parents broadcast to me one way. I went to church and I got broadcast to. And I went into the school and I got lectured and broadcast. I was in broadcast recipient mode. But you're not. You've grown up interacting. You learn differently. And you're going to change the universities. Why not do what we're doing in Portugal? Every kid in Portugal, K to 12, is getting a laptop connected to a high-speed connection in the classroom, and the teachers are changing the whole model of learning. There are no lectures. They're moving away from lectures. Government and democracy. We have these old industrial age models of government that are failing to solve problems. And as for democracy, isn't the model broken? It's kind of the same thing. I'm a politician. Listen to this 30-second negative TV ad where I attack my opponent around an issue as issues that young people could care less about. And then you go vote for me, and then I'm going to broadcast to you for 4 more years, and then we get to do it all over again. That model may have been okay for me. But it's not good enough for you see, because you didn't grow up being broadcast to, you grow up interacting and collaborating. You want a collaborative model of democracy. Why doesn't the leader of your country, I'm doing this with a couple of leaders in countries this year, launch a citizen engagement initiative? You know what? Every country here, you could have a 3-day conversation of the entire population of the country. Pick an issue. How do we solve climate change in, say, Portugal? And we now have the internet whereby people can have a real conversation. Initiatives get catalyzed. Good things happen. We've got the old industrial age model of the corporation, like the car companies. It's failing, the old bureaucratic model of how we innovate. We're moving to new network models now, where, do you know, in the Chinese motorcycle industry, there are all these little companies. They cooperate together. There's no Harley Davidson pulling all the strings. They meet on the internet, and they meet in tea houses. This is now 1/3 of all motorcycle production in the world. And get ready for the $1,000 car from China using the same model. Traditional, old, vertically integrated corporations have got to give way to new models. The media, newspapers around the world are collapsing. We're all on a New York Times death watch. How much longer can the New York Times, the paper of record, service its debt? Young people are not going to buy newspapers. I was interviewing this youngster in front of a big audience, like, I don't know, 6,000, 7,000 people. And I said to her, isn't it true your generation is the dumb generation? You're not informed. You don't read the newspaper. You get your news from Jon Stewart and The Daily Show on Comedy Central, don't you? And she says to me, oh, I don't think that's a fair characterization of my generation. It's true I don't read the newspaper. She says, but Mr. Tapscott, have you ever seen one of those things, a newspaper? They come out once a day. And you get this weird black stuff on your fingers, you know, and they don't have hot links and they're not multimedia. She says, let me tell you how I get my news. It's called an RSS feed. I have 60 RSS feeds, and I like to triangulate the news and form my own point of view. She says, it's true I watch Jon Stewart and The Daily Show, but not to get the news. She says, I don't think The Daily Show is funny unless you know the news. So the newspapers need to reinvent themselves. The record industry is collapsing. The industry that brought us Elvis and the Beatles is now suing children. It's hated by its customers, and it's going to go away. This is old models that fail to understand the new reality. Science is broken. I'm running out of time. But, you know, on and on I could go. Healthcare. In your country, you know what we should do? Every time somebody's born, they get a website, and that becomes their healthcare record. And you have full transparency into your record, and you have all these powerful tools that help you manage your healthcare. You will take responsibility for your own healthcare. You got diabetes, you got all these tools and information, you can collaborate with others. You will check your blood sugar level, you will take actions. The burden of managing health gets moved away from governments in part because governments just can't pay anymore. In the United States, this is 20% of the gross domestic product. So the cities, some of you come from cities like Sao Paulo and Mexico and so on that are deeply troubled cities. But I'm not just talking about those. I'm talking about Houston and Atlanta. We built these cities where we separate where you work and where you live and where you shop, and we connect them all together with giant highways that are spewing all this garbage into the air. We need to reinvent our cities, to have density, to build communities. And the internet has a huge role to play in that. I could go on. Each of these is a chapter of my new book. It comes out in September. It's called Macroeconomics. But this is a huge challenge. So to close, what is the challenge facing you? Well, I don't think you compare this to some recession. If you want to compare what's happening today, you've got to go back a few hundred years. But because it happened before, that there was a society where all of its institutions began to fail, and new ones were born. And the society was the agrarian feudal societies that surrounded the world. And we saw the printing press. And prior to the printing press, there was no knowledge. Knowledge was held in these oligopolies like the church and the nobility. But with the printing press, knowledge became more distributed. It didn't make sense for, say, the church to be doing medicine. We saw the rise of the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther described the printing press as God's greatest act of grace. We saw the rise of parliamentary democracy because it didn't make sense to have a noble making all the decisions in your life. The rise of modern capitalism, commercial relationships, the modern university, and so on. And industrial capitalism actually advanced the world significantly over a period of centuries. But now, all of these institutions of industrial capitalism are stalled. They're frozen. They've taken us to a certain point, and they can't take us further. And just like with the printing press, we have a revolution, a new medium of human communications, but it's different. See, the printing press gave people access to the written word. The internet turns everyone into a publisher. The printing press enabled people to have access to written knowledge. The internet gives you access to the knowledge and capability contained in the crania of other human beings on a global basis. This is an extraordinary time in human history. It's leading us into a new age, an age of networked intelligence, where collectively now you have the power to challenge the old oligopolies and the old institutions that have stalled the world and threatened the very existence of humanity and of our planet. So to close, consider 5 principles when you go about redesigning and rebuilding the world. Self-organization, as opposed to traditional hierarchies. People can now self-organize, and that's wonderful. Openness, transparency, force institutions to tell the truth and to make them naked. You know why? Because if you're going to be naked, you better be buff. If you're going to be naked, being fit is no longer optional. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. Demand open government. Demand corporations tell the truth. Thirdly, sharing. Sharing knowledge, sharing intellectual property. At Davos, I participated with the CEO of Nike in launching something called the Green Exchange. Companies all around the world are going to take their intellectual property about how to reduce energy, how to reduce carbon emissions, how to stop pollution, and so on. And rather than keeping that proprietary, they're going to place it in the commons where everyone can benefit from that, so that a rising tide lifts all boats. You know why they're doing this? They understand that business can't succeed in a world that's failing. We've got interdependence. Interdependence. We have a global world now, and everything is connected to everything else. And finally, companies and institutions need to act with integrity. You know what integrity is? 3 values. You're honest, you're accountable, you abide by your commitments, and you're considerate of the interests of others. And integrity is the foundation of trust. So this is a time of very profound change. Now, when you have a new paradigm like this, I wrote a book called Paradigm Shift 20 years ago, okay, so I'm allowed to use this word. But of course, the notion of a paradigm came out of a book in the 60s called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. A paradigm is a mental model, and paradigms put boundaries around what we think. They constrain our actions. And paradigms are often based on assumptions that are so strong that we don't know that they're there. The world is at the center of the universe. That was a paradigm. The big problem in the world is communism. Remember that one? Something can happen in art, science, culture, technology, whatever, that causes a new paradigm to emerge. That's what's happening. We're shifting from an old industrial age with an old set of institutions to a new age of network intelligence. You get a change like that, you get a crisis of leadership. Because vested interests fight against change, and leaders of old paradigms have great difficulty embracing the new. So to close, the challenge of leadership rests with your generation. And each of us now, because of our power, can be a leader for change. I hope that you'll keep communicating with each other, keep together on the web, great organizations like Taking It Global as a platform for collaboration. The stakes are very, very high. Don't give up. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. That's great. Well done.